Imagine being so notorious for your sexual appetite that 2,000 years later, your name is still a synonym for insatiable lust. That historians still debate whether you were the most scandalous woman in Roman history or the most slandered. Valeria Messalina, third wife of Emperor Claudius, mother of Britannicus and Octavia. And according to ancient Roman writers, a woman whose depravity was so extreme that she would sneak out of the palace at night, disguise herself as a prostitute, and work in the brothels of Rome just for the thrill of it. They said she challenged Rome's most infamous prostitute to a sex competition, and won, servicing 25 men in 24 hours. They said she was so insatiable that she once complained to her husband that no man could satisfy her. They said she orchestrated conspiracies, murdered rivals, and turned the imperial palace into her personal brothel. Sounds like a monster, right? A cautionary tale about female sexuality run amok? A woman so depraved that her execution at age 22 was not just justified but necessary? Here's the problem. Almost everything we know about Messalina was written by men who hated her. Men who wanted her dead. Men who wrote their accounts after she was already executed and couldn't defend herself. Men who had every reason to exaggerate, fabricate, and turn a powerful woman into a monster. So who was Valeria Messalina really? Was she the sex-crazed nymphomaniac of Roman propaganda? Or was she a young woman who committed the unforgivable sin of having power while female, and paid for it with her life and her reputation? This is the story of how Rome's most powerful men destroyed a woman, then spent the next 2,000 years destroying her memory. How they turned political assassination into moral justice by painting their victim as a sexual deviant. How they made sure that even today when you hear the name Messalina, you think whore. But here's what they don't want you to ask. Why were Roman men so terrified of a woman with power that they had to invent stories about her sexual depravity? What does it tell us about Roman society that the easiest way to discredit a woman was to call her a slut? And how many other women in history have been erased the same way, their real stories buried under propaganda so effective we still believe it millennia later? If you're ready to question everything you think you know about history's bad women, if you want to understand how propaganda works and why we should always ask who's telling the story, hit that subscribe button right now. Because the truth about Messalina is more complicated, more tragic, and more relevant than the lie that survived for 2,000 years. Let's go back to Rome in 38 CE, when a 14-year-old girl married a 50-year-old man who would soon become emperor. And let's watch how power, politics, and misogyny turned her into history's most infamous empress. Valeria Messalina was born around 17 to 20 CE into one of Rome's most prestigious families. She was connected to the imperial family through multiple bloodlines. Augustus's blood ran through her veins. She was nobility, educated, wealthy, and most dangerously for her future, beautiful and intelligent. At 14 or 15 she was married to Claudius, her second cousin. He was approximately 50 years old, limped, drooled, stuttered, and was generally considered an embarrassment to the imperial family. Nobody thought Claudius would ever be emperor. He was the family joke, the disabled scholar they kept alive out of pity. So this marriage wasn't about power. It was about maintaining bloodlines, keeping wealth in the family, typical aristocratic arrangements. Messalina probably expected to live a quiet life as the wife of an insignificant nobleman. Then in 41 CE, everything changed. Emperor Caligula was assassinated by his own guards. The Praetorian Guard found Claudius hiding behind a curtain in the palace, terrified he'd be killed next. Instead, they declared him emperor, specifically because he seemed weak, controllable, easily manipulated. Suddenly, at around 21 years old, Messalina was Empress of Rome, the most powerful woman in the known world. Wife to an emperor who everyone, including his own wife, considered incompetent. Think about that dynamic for a second. You're a young woman, intelligent and ambitious, married to a man 35 years older who everyone treats like an idiot. He becomes emperor through sheer accident. And you? You suddenly have access to the kind of power most people can only dream about. What would you do? Here's what we know Messalina actually did, documented in sources that even her enemies couldn't completely distort. She gave Claudius 2 children, Britannicus and Octavia. She involved herself in court politics as any empress would. She accumulated wealth and property as was her right. She had favorites and enemies at court. She used her influence to advance her family's interests and destroy her rivals. In other words, She acted exactly like every other member of the Roman imperial family. The men did the same things, accumulated wealth, eliminated rivals, wielded influence. But when a woman did it, that required explanation. And the explanation Roman writers chose was sexual depravity. This is where the propaganda begins. Our main sources for Messalina's scandalous behavior are Tacitus, Suetonius, Juvenal, and Cassius Dio. Let's talk about them. Tacitus wrote his annals around 70 years after Messalina's death. He wasn't there. He relied on second-hand accounts from people who had political reasons to blacken her name. Juvenal was a satirist writing even later, in the early 2nd century CE. His entire purpose was to mock and exaggerate for entertainment. Taking his descriptions of Messalina literally would be like taking Saturday Night Live sketches as historical documentation. Suetonius loved scandal and gossip. His histories are filled with sexual rumors about everyone, but notice how male emperors' sexual adventures are portrayed as virility while Messalina's are portrayed as depravity. Cassius Dio wrote in the 3rd century CE, almost 200 years after the events. He's repeating centuries-old gossip as fact. None of these men were sympathetic to Messalina. All of them were writing in a society where powerful women were threatening, where female sexuality was dangerous, where the easiest way to destroy a woman's reputation was to call her a whore. So when they describe Messalina sneaking out to brothels, competing with prostitutes, hosting orgies in the palace, we have to ask, is any of this true? Or is this what you say about any woman who has power and refuses to be controlled? Compare how these same sources describe male emperors. Caligula supposedly made his horse a consul, had incestuous relationships with his sisters, and declared himself a god. Nero killed his mother, his wives, and half the Senate. Tiberius allegedly ran a pedophile island on Capri. But historians debate whether those stories are true. They say, well, ancient sources exaggerate. They give male emperors the benefit of the doubt. Messalina? She's just accepted as depraved. No questions asked. The propaganda won. So here's what I need you to do right now. Comment below with your first reaction to hearing Messalina's name before this video. Because I'll bet money you thought sex-crazed empress, right? That's 2,000 years of propaganda still working perfectly. The incident that sealed Messalina's fate, and her reputation, happened in 48 CE. According to our hostile sources, here's what went down. While Emperor Claudius was away in Ostia for a few days, Messalina participated in a public marriage ceremony with a young senator named Gaius Silius. They allegedly held a massive party afterward, complete with drinking, revelry, and what Roman writers described as debauchery. This is presented in our sources as the ultimate scandal, the Empress of Rome publicly marrying another man while still married to the emperor. Clear evidence of her insane sexual appetite and political recklessness, right? But wait. Let's think critically about this story because nothing about it makes sense if you assume Messalina was just a sex-crazed idiot. First, Gaius Silius was not some random lover. He was one of the most powerful senators in Rome, from an extremely prestigious family. This wasn't a hookup, this was a political alliance. Second, Roman marriage law was complex, but everyone involved would have known that a public marriage ceremony while Claudius lived would be legally meaningless. Messalina was no fool. So why do it publicly? Third, the sources tell us this happened while Claudius was away, but also that word got back to him almost immediately. If Messalina wanted to hide an affair, why make it the most public event possible? Here's what modern historians think actually happened. This wasn't a sex scandal. This was a coup attempt. Messalina was around 28 years old. She'd been empress for 7 years, watching her disabled, elderly husband struggle to control an empire. She knew Claudius wouldn't live forever. When he died, what would happen to her? To her young son Britannicus? The Roman succession was never guaranteed. Emperors were assassinated regularly. Imperial children were murdered to prevent future claims to the throne. Messalina had every reason to be terrified about what would happen when Claudius died. So she made a desperate gamble. Ally with Gaius Silius, one of Rome's most powerful men, and try to secure her position. The marriage wasn't about sex or love. It was about creating a political partnership that could survive Claudius's death. Maybe even hasten it. It was a coup. Or an attempted coup. And when Claudius's advisors found out, they panicked. The people who rushed to tell Claudius weren't worried about his honor or his marriage. They were terrified that Messalina and Silius would successfully overthrow the emperor, and them along with him. Narcissus and Pallas, Claudius's most powerful freedman advisors, had everything to lose if Messalina succeeded. So they did what politicians have done throughout history: they framed the narrative. It wasn't a political coup, it was a sex scandal. Messalina wasn't ambitious, she was depraved. She didn't threaten the emperor's power, she betrayed his bed. Because here's the thing about ancient Rome: a woman plotting against the emperor is dangerous and might have supporters. But a whore? Everyone agrees whores deserve to die. The sources tell us Claudius was devastated, betrayed, humiliated. They say Narcissus had to keep reminding him of Messalina's crimes because Claudius kept forgetting why he was supposed to be angry. That detail, if true, is fascinating. It suggests Claudius didn't actually care that much about sexual fidelity. He had to be convinced to execute his wife. Messalina fled to the gardens of Lucullus, property that belonged to her. She sent messengers to Claudius begging for a chance to defend herself, to explain, to see him. She was denied. Narcissus and the other advisors couldn't risk letting her speak to Claudius. Couldn't risk her explaining the political reality of what she'd done. Couldn't risk the emperor being swayed by his wife of 14 years, the mother of his children. So they sent soldiers. And according to our sources, Messalina was executed in her gardens while trying to write a petition to her husband. She was approximately 28 years old. Her lover Gaius Silius and dozens of their alleged co-conspirators were also executed. The depraved whore version of events was established immediately. Within hours of her death, the Senate was denouncing her. Her name was chiseled off monuments. Her images were destroyed. The official history was written before her body was cold. And that history said, she was a nymphomaniac who betrayed her husband. Not a political player who lost a deadly game. Not a woman trying to survive in a system designed to destroy her. Just a whore who got what whores deserve. Do you see how this works? Do you see how you control history by controlling the narrative? They murdered her, then murdered her reputation so thoroughly that 2,000 years later, we still call her depraved without questioning who decided that was her story. That's not just ancient history. That's how power operates, then and now. After Messalina's execution, the propaganda machine went into overdrive. The writers who came after, the ones whose accounts we still read today, outdid each other in describing her depravity. Each historian added new scandalous details, each more lurid than the last. Juvenal's Satire 6, written decades later, contains the infamous story of Messalina working in brothels. He claims she would leave the palace at night, disguise herself as a prostitute named Lysiska, and service clients until dawn. Then she'd return to the palace, exhausted but unsatisfied. It's vivid. It's memorable. It's almost certainly complete fiction. Think about the logistics. The Empress of Rome, one of the most recognizable women in the empire, sneaking past palace guards, walking through Rome's streets, working in a brothel without anyone recognizing her or selling the story for massive profit. In a city where gossip was currency and everyone knew everyone's business? It's fantasy. Misogynistic fan fiction designed to titillate male readers while teaching women what happens when you have too much power and not enough shame. The prostitute competition story? Same category. Messalina allegedly challenged a famous prostitute named Scylla to see who could service more clients in 24 hours. Messalina supposedly won with 25 partners, then complained she still wasn't satisfied. Does that sound like a real event or like a pornographic parable about insatiable female sexuality? It's the ancient Roman version of slut-shaming taken to its logical extreme. Not only was she sexually active, she was impossibly, inhumanly sexual. A monster of lust. Here's what we can actually document about the aftermath of Messalina's death. Claudius remarried within months, to his niece Agrippina the Younger, who was arguably even more politically ruthless than Messalina. Agrippina would eventually poison Claudius to put her son Nero on the throne. But somehow Agrippina's reputation doesn't center on sexual depravity. Why? Because she was successful. She won. Winners don't get called whores, losers do. Messalina's children survived initially. Her daughter Octavia was later married to Nero, her cousin/stepbrother. Roman families were complicated. Her son Britannicus was poisoned by Nero at age 13, eliminated as a potential rival for the throne. Both of Messalina's children ended up dead because of imperial politics. The same politics their mother had been trying to navigate when she made her fatal gamble with Gaius Silius. Within a generation, Messalina became a byword for female sexual excess. Roman poets used her name as shorthand for any woman who refused to be controlled by male authority. The propaganda was so effective that it survived the fall of Rome itself, spread through medieval Christian writings, and continued straight through to modern times. Even today, Messalina appears in dictionaries as a synonym for promiscuous woman. Most people have never heard of Gaius Silius or Narcissus or any of the men who actually orchestrated her death. But Messalina? She's infamous. Modern historians have started pushing back. Scholars like Sandra Joshel and Emma Southan have written extensively about how we need to read ancient sources about women critically. How we need to ask who benefits from these stories. How we need to separate documented facts from moralistic propaganda. But the damage is done. Type Messalina into a search engine and see what comes up. Sex scandal, nymphomaniac, depraved empress. Not political victim, or scapegoat, or woman destroyed by the patriarchy. The men who killed her won. They controlled the narrative so completely that their version became the only version. They turned a political assassination into a moral lesson. They made sure that every woman who came after Messalina would know. Step out of line, grab for power, refuse to be controlled, and we won't just kill you, we'll make sure your name is synonymous with shame forever. Hit that like button if this is making you angry. Share this video with someone who needs to understand how character assassination works, how it worked in ancient Rome and how it still works today. Because Messalina isn't the only woman this happened to. She's just one of the most successful examples. And if we don't learn to recognize propaganda when we see it, we'll keep believing it. So what does a scandalous Roman empress from 2,000 years ago have to teach us? Everything about how society controls women. Everything about how history is written by winners. Everything about how sexual accusations have always been the easiest weapon to destroy a powerful woman. Look at the pattern. Throughout history, when a woman gets too powerful, too visible, too unwilling to follow the rules, what's the first accusation? Sexual impropriety. Doesn't matter if it's true. Doesn't matter if there's evidence. Just the accusation is enough to destroy her credibility, her reputation, her power. Cleopatra? History remembers her as a seductress, not the brilliant political strategist and scholar she actually was. Marie Antoinette? Let them eat cake and pornographic pamphlets, not the nuanced truth of her reign. Monica Lewinsky? Defined entirely by a sexual scandal while the powerful man involved became an elder statesman. The playbook hasn't changed in 2 millennia. When you want to destroy a woman, you sexualize her. You make her story about her body instead of her actions. You reduce her power to promiscuity. You make sure that's all anyone remembers. And it works. It still works. Think about how we talk about powerful women today. Female politicians face constant commentary about their appearance, their clothing, their personal lives in ways male politicians never do. Women in business are called aggressive and difficult for the same behavior that makes men strong leaders. Women in entertainment are divas and difficult to work with, while men are perfectionists. We've gotten subtler about it, but the core strategy is the same. Undermine women's authority by focusing on anything except their actual competence. Make it about sex, appearance, likability, anything but the substance of what they're doing. Messalina's real crime wasn't sexual depravity. It was political ambition. It was refusing to be passive. It was trying to control her own destiny in a system designed to control her. And when that system crushed her, it made sure everyone learned the lesson. This is what happens to women who refuse to stay in their place. But here's what they didn't count on. Eventually, enough time passes that we can look back and see the propaganda for what it is. We can read those ancient sources and ask, wait, who wrote this? What did they have to gain from these stories? What's the evidence versus what's the accusation? And once you start asking those questions about Messalina, you can't stop. You start asking them about every bad woman in history. You start questioning every scandal, every accusation, every reputation destroyed by sexual shaming. You start recognizing the pattern in your own life. When someone tries to undermine a woman by focusing on her appearance or her relationships or her sexuality instead of her actual work. When someone calls a woman crazy or emotional, instead of addressing her legitimate concerns. When someone spreads rumors about a woman's private life to destroy her professional credibility, that's the same playbook. That's the same weapon that killed Messalina and thousands of other women whose names we don't even know because the propaganda against them was so successful. The antidote is simple but hard. Question the story. Ask who benefits from this narrative. Look for evidence beyond accusation. Give women the same benefit of the doubt you give men. Messalina deserved a trial. She deserved to defend herself. She deserved a fair hearing instead of execution followed by character assassination. We can't give her that. She's been dead for nearly 2,000 years. But we can refuse to let her story be used as a weapon against women today. We can tell the truth about how she was destroyed and why. We can make sure the next time someone tries to reduce a powerful woman to a sexual scandal, we recognize it for what it is. Propaganda. Pure and simple. That's the real story of Valeria Messalina. Not the depraved nymphomaniac of Roman propaganda, but a young woman who played a deadly political game in a system rigged against her, and lost. Then had her reputation destroyed so thoroughly that 2,000 years later, we still believe the lies. But she's not the only one. Next video, I'm telling you about another woman who was sexually slandered by history. Someone who was called a witch, a seductress, a dangerous temptress who destroyed men with her beauty. Someone whose real story is so much more interesting than the propaganda, and whose legacy is still being used to control women today. Think you know the truth about Cleopatra? Think again. Because everything you learned about her, the affairs, the suicide, the femme fatale narrative, was written by the men who conquered Egypt and needed to justify destroying her. Wait until you hear what she was actually like. You're going to be shocked. But only if you subscribe. Look, these stories exist in the margins of history because powerful people don't want them told. They want you to believe the simple version. Bad woman, deserved punishment, end of story. Asterisk asterisk. If you leave now without subscribing, that's exactly what happens. These truths disappear again. The propaganda wins. And the next person who hears Messalina's name just thinks whore, without ever questioning who decided that was her story. Asterisk asterisk. Don't let them win. Subscribe. Smash that notification bell. Comment below. Had you heard of Messalina before? What did you think about her? And share this video with someone who needs to understand how propaganda works. Because this isn't just history. This is how power operates. How reputations are destroyed. How women are controlled. And the only defense is knowing the truth. See you in the next one. Don't forget to subscribe, because these stories need to be told and they need people like you to listen.